Hi everyone, it's Darlene. Welcome back for another card video. Today's card is really cool and pretty easy to make. I used the Partial Cut Flowers by Simon Says Stamp. What I like about these dies is that they come individual, so you can pick whatever flowers you want to use and put them wherever you want to use them. I'm also using the Avriel Custom Panel dies. I'm just going to use this curve here as a guide and the small circle for the center of the flowers. The first thing I'm going to do is take a piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock. I'm going to measure 1 1/4 inches up both of the sides. This is measuring at 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And this is just so that I can get my curve centered in the middle of my panel. So once I have it centered according to those two 1 1/4 inch marks, I'm going to draw a guide with a pencil. And this is where I'm going to put my flowers. You can see here. So I decided I also needed a center mark. So I'm going to mark it at 2 3/4 inches, and then I'll take my T-square, which I use all the time. It's a really handy tool to draw a line straight down. And now there's no way for me to mess this up. So I'm going to take my flower and I'm going to put 2 points on either side of the curve, and then that middle part on my center line, and I'll run it through my big shot. So when I pull it off, you'll see that it doesn't actually come out because it only partially cuts the flower. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do another one on the right hand side, and I'm using the right and left petals on that guide. So to make sure I follow exactly that pencil line, so I'll run that through again through the big shot, and I'll pull that off, and then once again as close as I can but not touching the petal, the next petal, until I get to the end here. And I did leave a little bit of space at the very end and did 2 more on the other side. Now the next step is to cut between each of these flowers so that I could remove part of the panel. So I just took an X-Acto knife and I'm just going to cut in between each of these flowers just a tiny little line, and I'm using just a mat underneath, like a cutting mat. Now for the other edge, like to the edge of the cardstock, I could have used my X-Acto knife, but I have more control with scissors. The X-Acto knife makes me a little nervous. So I just cut this with a scissor. And then I realized that I forgot I needed to cut in between the petals because those are also connected. So I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife again, and I'm just going to cut a tiny little line in between each of these petals above the curve, not below the curve, just above the curve, because I want to keep those flowers attached to the bottom half of this panel. So I'm going to do this on all of the different petals here. I'm going to skip to the end here. So this is the last one. And because these flowers are a little delicate, I decided to erase my pencil marks before I removed the top of the panel, just to make sure I didn't kind of break off any of the petals. So I erased all my pencil marks, and then I removed the top, and it comes out perfectly. What's cool about this die is that all of the petals of the flower will pop up, so I can pull up every single one, even the ones on the side that you think would be connecting each of the flowers together. But actually they're connected in between the petals to that bottom half of the panel. So you could pull all these petals up now or later. I did a little bit now, and then I did it again a little bit later. Next, I'm going to work on my background panel. I have a piece of Neenah Solar White cardstock, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and I'm going to be using 3 different colors of blue. The first is peacock feathers. I'm just going to blend this on with my ink foam applicator, and you know, I've done this many times, and I'm putting a really thick layer on, and that really does help with removing those rectangular blocks. The more ink you put on there and the more you rub it like and blend it onto the cardstock, the less you'll see those lines. So my next color was Salty Ocean, and my third is Chipped Sapphire. I also did this ink blending on a piece of watercolor paper, and I'm going to show you that in just a little bit. The ink tends to blend a little bit better on the watercolor paper, but the results you get are different. I'm going to repeat this ink blending with the same colors on a piece, just a strip here that I'll be able to cut my flower centers from. Next, I'm going to add some water splatters. I'm going to dip my brush in some water, and then I'll wipe off the excess water from my brush that's not on the bristles, because that water tends to drop down in big drops, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to tap a little bit of it on. The bigger the brush, the bigger the water spots you'll get. So I use a medium size, and I usually tend to get medium size plus some smalls. So I'm going to do this a few times until I get the look that I want, being sure to wipe off the brush every time I dip it back into the water. I'm going to take a tissue and wipe up any excess water that's still left on my cardstock, but my drops are pretty small, and so they're almost already dry, and this isn't really going to do very much. But I am going to show you my watercolor panel that I created with the same 3 distress inks, and I also did the same water droplets on that, and you'll see the difference. See, these have kind of a hard edge around each drop, and here's the panel I created on Canson XL watercolor paper. There are multiple differences here. First, the ink itself is much more vibrant on the Nina panel. It seems a little more muted and cloudy on the watercolor panel, but then the water droplets, which I applied in the exact same way, pull up a lot more ink from the watercolor paper, and you don't get kind of that hard edge around each one. Now I'm going to use this little circle to cut my flower centers, and I'm going to cut one from each color and then one in between each of the colors since I have 5 flowers. And so the flower centers are going to follow the same color pattern as the background. To adhere the centers, I'm going to use a 2-way glue pen. I'm just going to dab a little bit in the center, and then I'll use a pick-me-up stick to pick up the dots and place them in the center. This pick-me-up stick is another tool that I use quite a bit that's very handy. My sentiment is from the Greetings and Succulents set by Simon Says Stamp. The thank and the you are separate, so it's easier to stamp them on 2 lines. I'm going to stamp my thank first, and then I'm going to stamp my you below it and to the right. Notice I'm cleaning off the top because my flower petals are kind of raised up a little bit. I don't want to get any ink on those, so I'm going to be really careful. So my sentiment is going to flow with the line of the curve. To make these flowers pop even more, I'm going to add some scotch foam tape on the back. And then for the centers of the flowers, I cut Stampin' Up! Dimensionals into quarters, and that was big enough to fit in the center of the flower. And I'll just peel off the backing, and then I'm going to cover the left side of my distress ink panel. And then I'm going to adhere this with some ATG, so put some tape runner on the back. And then as usual, I like to use my MISTI to line up my panels when I have a full panel going on a full panel. And so I'm just going to use the left corner to line them up. And that is the card for today. So pretty easy to make, and I love the look of these cool flowers that you can partially die cut without much effort whatsoever. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.